What's up guys, in this video I'll be diving into the comparisons between the new Vcore 98 2023, the Ezone 98 2022 and discuss a little bit about the changes between the old and the new model. Before we start the review, help me out by subscribing to the channel. If you want to see more reviews, check me out on Instagram to stay up to date, and if you want to support the channel you can buy me a coffee or give me a super thanks. Now quickly moving on to the specs, check out the screen overlay for the spec comparisons. The biggest differences are going to be the head shape and the beam thickness between the Ezone and the Vcore. The changes made from the old and the new Vcore is the head shape is now redesigned to make the sweet spot a bit higher up with a more teardrop style design. They lowered the stiffness rating a little bit and also lowered the average swing weight. Also check out my specs and string setups on the screen. The Vcore that I had was freshly strung with Polytool Pro Black 1.25mm at 52 pounds, which is 4 pounds above my normal tension. And you can see my Ezone setups here as well. So for feel and stiffness, the Ezone is muted and very dampened and very fast off the string bit. There's a bit of flex to the racket that gets more noticeable the more weight you add, just like the Vcore 95. It's not super stiff, but not super plush, and what it's going to come down to is more about what string and tension that you choose to use. Personally, I'm going to go for a string that will give in more because I want to maximize the ball pocketing, so I tend to use poly-poly hybrid setups where the cross is a soft poly and allows it to pocket the ball better. The new Vcore has a stiffer hoop but way more ball pocketing, therefore it can give you the illusion of a completely plush racket, but then on certain off-center shots over time it might start to fatigue and wear your arm and wrist out a little bit. But actually I prefer the pocketing feel from the new Vcore because it's more up my alley and it gives me the feedback that I need to get extra control over the ball. But that's totally preferential and not quite a pro or a con on either frame. So they are not vastly different in terms of comfort. It's more about how the ball reacts off the string bed and whether you like a muted feel or you prefer more ball pocketing. The new Vcore felt more immediately comfortable because I was able to play at a 52 pound tension, which is 4 pounds above my normal average, and little to no problems with that. But as I mentioned, it did seem to kind of fatigue my wrist and elbow over the course of their session, so by the end I was feeling it a little bit more than I would the Ezone at my normal tensions. I think the stiffness of the hoop can come back to bite you if you're a bit sensitive. The old Vcore felt more similar to the Ezone in terms of a uniform and muted thudding feel, but the new version, for my own liking, made an overall improvement. The closest racket to resemble the Vcore's new feel is the Boom MP, where the Boom Pro was a little bit more harsh compared to the MP and had a higher stiffness rating, and the MP was just soft enough. To best describe the feel of the Vcore and the Boom MP, the sweet spot is nice and plush, but the reverberations that you could feel from the stiffness of the hoop made it almost feel like a wooden instrument to some degree, kind of like a bongo drum, where the actual frame itself didn't feel that solid after impact. And you can feel a little bit of that hollowness to the frame, whereas the Ezone you can get a fully solid feel and is consistent through the entire rack. So whilst the sweet spot feels really nice, I think the outer hoop feels a little harsh, and that's why you might see some feedback that the Vcore feels a little cheap to some degree. For power, in my opinion, I really think that the Ezone and Vcore are reversed in terms of their playability and how they're marketed. Not to mention, one of my close friends that bought the previous Vcore 98 is someone who completely plays flat and really excelled using that frame, whereas typically you should be expecting a spin player to enjoy the frame more. In my original Ezone review, I mentioned that the Ezone does have access to power, but I found that the control was more of a primary trait due to the 1619 pattern and slightly lower power levels compared to the previous versions. But the power levels were still a close secondary trait. The previous Vcore, on the other hand, was by far a much more powerful racket in comparison to the Ezone, and that power seeped into the spin a little bit more, where it provided more penetration through the court, but not so much in terms of the RPMs. The current Vcore, I think there is slightly less power than the previous version, but still more powerful than the Ezone. And for my swing style, I felt that flattening balls was both more reliable and penetrating through the court to perform. And the reason why I believe this is because firstly, the swing weight on average is roughly around 6 to 8 points lower, and secondly, the slight changes to the head shape in combination with a lower swing weight. I think that the old Vcore swung better through the ball and the new Vcore is easier to swing underneath the ball. For me, something to do with the Ezone beam shape made it less reliable for me to switch between spin and flat shots, and it was better for me to inject pace in the Ezone if I was more cautious of how I set myself up in a rally. Otherwise I would risk it flying or dumping a little more than I like. The Vcore, I think I can reel off a few more bigger flat shots in a row consistently, even when I'm a little stretched or off balance. For maneuverability, both rackets are quite maneuverable. The Ezone a little bit more specific to swing styles because the head shape at 3 and 9 is very thick, and for some people that may totally slow their swings down. But if you have a modern stroke, I think it moves quite fast for all shot types. The new Vcore definitely has improved in this area of maneuverability where I felt the previous one failed in its aerodynamics, despite what it was advertised as. The forehand is much more fluid for me to hit now, but more importantly, the one-hander is much better overall and also better compared to the Ezone. One thing in particular with the Ezone I personally didn't like was how it felt when I moved it through the one-hander and the swing path. It didn't feel natural to me, and it felt much harder to make the ball go through the court, whereas the Vcore, it was an immediate pick up and play with no adjustment at all. On control, the Ezone is lesser powered with a tighter string pattern and more precise overall. The new Vcore, whilst not the most controlled racket out there, has a noticeable jump in control, and I think that would mostly boil down to the increased spin control with better maneuverability on the upward swing path, as well as the change in feel for me personally, which gives me the confidence to swing out and hit my spots a little bit more comfortably, which matches more what I'm used to playing most with. The previous one lacks so much feedback that it'll probably take you a lot longer to become adjusted to the ins and outs of how it plays. At the same swing weights, the Vcore is easier to get consistent depth, whereas the Ezone I would drop a little shorter sometimes if I lost focus. So for spin with these versions, now that the new Vcore has a similar base swing weight as the Ezone, more aerodynamics on an upward swing path and a bit less power, they both have decent spin, very close to each other to some degree. But I still would give the edge to the Ezone as I think it provides a bit more penetrating spin or a higher jump off the bounce. But I was definitely getting some solid spin from the Vcore, and realistically I was only using Poly Tour Pro, so I think there's plenty of spin potential there to be unlocked with the right stroke and string choice. But compared to the likes of the Extreme Tour, the Aero 98 and even the Shift 315, I think spin is not quite on par with those for a racket that is supposed to be Yonex' spin line. The Vcore has a higher launch angle than the Ezone, but even with that I still think it can flatten out balls more reliably as well. For the serve, the Ezone is quite clearly one of the best serving rackets ever to be made, especially with that razor thin throat design, making it exceptionally fast and versatile for anyone to pick up. The Vcore in this category is improved here due to the increased maneuverability, and whilst it doesn't feel as intuitive as the Ezone, it still does a very good job. And I think for certain stroke styles, it could be a toss up between which one you prefer rather than which one is the better serving racket. For the Ezone I measured a top speed of around 193 km an hour, and the Vcore was slightly lower around the 189 to 190 area. They are both accurate rackets for sliders, kicks, targeting and flat, and personally for me I can serve with almost any racket, and the new Vcore was no different. If anything, I actually prefer the feel of the new Vcore's ball pocketing, but overall I prefer the speed of the Ezone's aerodynamics. The previous Vcore felt a little bit more sluggish, and whilst it could produce still a good serve, it didn't suit my swing as well as the Ezone and the new Vcore. For forgiveness, the change to move the sweet spot higher up on the string bed for the new Vcore by going to a more aggressive teardrop style design bodes really well for my game, especially for my forehand. Compared to the Ezone, I would say it's slightly more forgiving, where on the Ezone it was certainly a bit of a dead spot somewhere off center where it kills a lot of your shot's momentum when you miss hit. On the Vcore, I didn't really seem to have that problem, but maybe if you're someone that likes to hit more towards the middle and you have a bit more of a flatter stroke style, then you may struggle a little bit more with where the sweet spot is targeted to be. For stability, I would agree with the new Vcore. It is more stable than the previous version, but it doesn't make it an overall stable racket. I had an underspec Vcore 98 2021 at the same swing weight as the new average, and it played pretty terrible in my opinion. It lacked a lot of stability and plow through, and only played well when I brought the swing weight up to its normal standard average, which was around the 324 to 325 mark from memory. The new one does a much better job at this lower swing weight, and I really found no crazy issues on medium pace shots. Where it struggled the most was very high pace shots. You'd have to make pretty solid contact in the sweet spot, otherwise it would shank a bit. So something like returning serves where I choose to block a lot didn't really work out for me as well as I would like. The Ezone's thicker beam I think provides a little bit better stability at the lower swing weight, but overall I think it would need just a slight bump up with additional modifications, only ever so slightly in my opinion. So going from 318 to 323 would work well enough. On volleys, the Vcore held up pretty decently, played a number of double sets with it, and it was fast enough to maneuver around for reflex volleys, stable enough for shots that weren't all out bangers, and the ball pocketing that I liked gave plenty of feel and responsiveness, making it pretty decent for touch shots and touch volleys. Nothing to this racket was outstanding for volleys though, but it was a well balanced approach and on par with what I would expect from a more primarily baseliners racket. So who's this racket for? The new Vcore is a fairly versatile and easy to use frame for intermediate to advanced players, suitable for both counterpunchers and aggressive baseliners that prefer a bit of a higher launch angle, who want access to spin and power compared to more control orientated frames, and is still fast and whippy for maximum racket speed through the air. I would recommend it for players who are rated 4.0 and above, or UTR rating of 5 and higher. So my final thoughts is that despite the racket getting a bit of flack, personally I think it wasn't that bad. I actually thought this was an overall improvement to the racket compared to the previous generation, and tends to suit my game a lot better as well. If anything, it brings it up closer to the Ezone in terms of overall playability, with the Ezone being one of the best and most versatile rackets last year. My opinion on the previous Vcore 98 was so-so, but the new model I enjoyed playing with and is a solid racket in many categories overall. It might not produce the same heavy spin like its direct competitors, but certainly has plenty of spin for people coming from frames like the Blade V8, Ultra Pro, or the Radicals and Pro Staffs. Last year, I would definitely give a clear winner to the Ezone 98 between the two, but now it's truly a toss-up of what you like better. Actually, I find it very difficult to decide between what I prefer, as it will come down to your preference of feel and how you swing at the ball. What I like about the Vcore is the one-hander feels more solid and provides easier depth and plow through. The ball pocketing is way more up my alley, and it has a superior flattening ability while still being able to maintain a good amount of spin, which is a great way for you to change up your shot selections. Where the Ezone shines better is that it also has a similar level of accessible power, but a lot more precision and slightly more spin, and the serve is completely effortless from the get-go. Although the Vcore is not far behind on the serve, it still doesn't quite match up to the Ezone 1-for-1. So the biggest decision for me if I were to choose between the two, where I find the most contrast, is whether or not I would want to prioritize the feel and ball pocketing of the Vcore, or would I want the extra control from the Ezone, as I think all the other categories can mostly be interchangeable, especially with some slight modifications. And that concludes my review. Please like and share the video if you enjoyed it. Be sure to stay for my racket ratings at the end of the video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.